Hi, everybody. This is going to be my very first dramatic reading. They'll get better. This is my first time. I've been talking about it for ever. And so now it's just time to get started because it is what it is. So expect me to grow because I reserve the right to get better. I'll be changing all kinds of things. Like right now, I'm on my desktop. I might not like that going forward, and I might do my phone or I might get a different camera setup. I don't know. We'll see. We're gonna play it by ear, but the point is, I got started, and sometimes that's all it is getting started and then improving as you go. So here I am. Very first story I'm going to do, well, first reading I'm going to do is from Promised Eternity by Dawn Ibanez. So this is from Sins Entertainment, which is a K-pop story with it's an interracial K-pop story. It's ambw for you guys that don't know what that is. It's Asian male, black female, well, black woman. And so here's the description. Jeo Sanna spent her teenage years training to become an idol. As one of the few black girls training in Korea, she was on the path for greatness until an attack by an overzealous fan ruins her face and ended her career. After years out of the public eye, she's pushed back into the limelight in drama. The only bright spot in this dumpster fire is Daejun, the man that broke her heart. Ooh. Yang Daejun is the main singer of the K-pop group Tempo. For years, the group has been his family. The dominoes start to fall when a group mate dies. They now must deal with the press, contract negotiations, promoting their next album, all while trying to channel their grief and anger. Then Sana comes back. And that's the way it always goes. The woman he walked away from. With her return, he doesn't want to let her go again. The new label, Sins Entertainment, wants to sign Sana and bring her as a member of the new girl group Dynasty. Nice. Tempo is also offered a deal with Sins, but they would need to start from scratch. With a chance to rekindle a teenage love affair, Sana and Daejun will have to deal with the rumors, scandals, and new roles with the label. Will they be able to come together in harmony, or will too many sour notes strike the wrong chord? Well, I guess we're going to find out. So that is the blurb for Promised Eternity by Dawn Ibanez. Chapter 1. Sana. I hated all the pomp and circumstance. This was supposed to be a tragic event. Someone was dead. One would think the press should respect them enough to give their family and friends a moment to grieve, or at least hope the vultures would back off long enough for everyone to adjust. But no. Kim Sung-guk was a star. That made him open game. I walked around the crowd of mourning fans. None of them knew what happened. They honestly didn't need to know. Song Opa gave them life, gave his life and soul. They didn't deserve his death. That was never the legacy he wanted to leave behind. I reached the edge of the street. Police officers stood holding the line for the random rabid superfan that tried to run into the funeral home. JJ didn't tell me what the exact arrangements were. I didn't care. I wanted to come and pay my respects to Song Opa's mother. She had to be destroyed over this. An officer stepped in my way. You aren't allowed past here. He was careful not to touch my shoulder, but I knew he would push me back if he needed to. More flashes went off as I reached into my purse. Those invited to the funeral were given special passes to show the police. It was a way to keep most of the fans out. When I showed him the pass, he looked at me, trying to examine my face. He knew that if I had an invitation, I had to be a celebrity. He just wanted to know who I was. It was fine. Once the officer saw what I kept behind my mask, he would know. I lowered the black covering I always wore and removed my oversized, opaque sunglasses from my eyes. He blinked at me, and more flashes went off as members of the paparazzi also realized who I was. There was only one black former idol trainee with scars covering the left side of her face and neck. A car pulled up beside me, and the rear door opened. More flashes lit the area as my stepbrother exited the vehicle. He looked between the officer and me. and I could see the displeasure on his face. The attack that left me scarred was ancient history, but it will always be fresh for him. Is there a problem? He asked. I shook my head and put my sunglasses back on. No, I just got here, and the officer was asking me for my pass. JJ Opa looked at the officer once more and held out his hand for me to move past them both. I would have fought with him if this had been any other time. I don't need him to go all heavy handed overprotective mode. But Song Opa's death was something that shook us all. I moved past the two men and walked towards the main doors of the funeral home. As I approached the entrance, the doors opened. I looked up and swallowed. Another member of the group, Tempo, stood. He was the one I hoped to avoid. Yang Daejun stood at the open door. His eyes quickly scanned my face, only to stop when he saw my scars. He shook his head and met my eyes. I knew he still felt guilty, but I didn't want to listen to another apology. None of us were here for that. When I was close enough, he bowed his head. We didn't know if he would make it. His voice washed over me, and I closed my eyes. His voice was always smooth as silk. Hushed whispers had always been something that passed between us. Our past relationship was something I didn't want to revisit. Not right now. Songguk deserved better than that. I bowed my head at Daejun. He wasn't the reason I was here. I wasn't going to disappoint Song Opa's mother. I looked down the hallway. I could see the various other idols and industry leaders. It broke my heart knowing how loved and respected he had been, yet he felt so alone in the world. A hand at the base of my spine made me move. I looked up into JJ Opa's face. He was trying to close himself off while living up to his position as their group leader. I linked my finger with his pinky like I did when we were younger. When he looked at me, I shook my head. You don't have to be the strong one. He lowered his head and sighed. If not me, then who? His eyes glanced at the scars on my face. I'm supposed to be the leader, but he was our rock. He was your rock too. It was him and Uncle that convinced the company to keep you. I nodded. It was a tightly kept secret that I discovered during a pity party. Song Opa found me drunk and upset. Between him and Daejun, they got me back to my apartment and explained the situation I had been offered since I couldn't make a debut. Tempo was the reason why I took the position. I could feel his eyes on me. He was older than me by 2 years. But ever since our parents married, he acted as if there were decades between us. I thought about my history with Daejun. My brother would have caused a massive fight, one that would have destroyed the group. I smiled sadly as I brushed away a stray tear. Song Opa always ran interference for us. A shaky breath left me when I saw my aunt and uncle speaking with a few of the members of Tempo. Aunt Tori came over to me with her arms open. She knew Songguk was close to me as JJ Opa. He was another older brother, one that was often thought of as my partner in crime. My aunt wrapped me in her arms and pressed a kiss to my temple. How are you, sweetie? That was a loaded question, but I would answer, confused, heartbroken. I don't want to believe he's gone. How are you and Uncle? She sighed and she shook her head. Jung-hoon is trying to talk with a few of the executives about how to handle this. Songguk was important to a lot of people in a lot of ways. He was trying to protect Songguk's mother and make sure she was the sole proprietor of his estate. Aunt Tori looked at JJ Opa and smiled sadly when he wrapped his arms around her in a hug. I stepped back and stopped when I felt a hand on my waist. I looked over my shoulder and saw and locked eyes with Daejun again. Careful, he whispered. His eyes went to the sitting room and he gently took my hand into his. I'm sure his mother would like seeing you again. I nodded and touched Opa's arm. I'll be back. He looked at me and nodded. I wasn't going to analyze the look he gave Daejun. I didn't want to become a wedge between them again, especially not here. There were too many people, too many cameras. I didn't want to think about the headlines as another scandal involving me hit the press. It had been bad enough 6 years ago. As I slid my mask back into place, Daejun led me to the sitting room. The three men surrounding Sunguk's mother looked at me with sad smiles. Auntie, Daejun said softly, she's here. I looked at Sung Opa's mother. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she still looked the same. While her face was ageless, her hair gave away some of her secrets. Her long salt and pepper locks were pulled back into a tight ponytail. She held a navy blue handkerchief in her trembling hands. I stepped closer to her and bowed. I wish we could have seen each other under happier circumstances, Mrs. Kim. She looked at me for a long moment before standing up. I straightened and lowered my head. I wasn't going to cause a scene. If she wanted me to leave, I would. I know plenty of people that would happily get rid of the stain in Galaxy's orbit. With Sunguk gone, I not only lost my best friend, but a protector as well. I inhaled when a pair of arms wrapped around my shoulders. I blinked and looked at Sunguk's mother and returned the embrace. The sister he never had, she whispered in my ear. I closed my eyes and tightened my arms around her. There weren't many people that understood the friendship he and I had. Too many people speculated that there was a torrid affair between us, especially after some of the tabloids reported strife between Sunguk and JJ Opa. It was a relief that his mother didn't think of me as a bad influence on his life. She pulled away from me, but kept a grip on my hands. Sit with me. I glanced at the door and saw my aunt and brother speaking with my uncle. When Opa saw where I was, he simply nodded and returned to his conversation. I exhaled slowly as I sat next to Mrs. Kim. She hadn't let go of my hand, and I wasn't going to pull away from her. The men around us quietly acknowledged me. These had been my boys. The Maknaes were the three youngest members of the group. Happy was the first to wrap an arm around me and bend over for a hug. He didn't say anything, but I understood his silence. I pressed a kiss to his cheek. We'll be okay, I whispered into his ear. He nodded as he straightened. He then moved to take a seat in a row behind us. I looked at the way everything was set up and frowned. There was no casket. Opa said that his mother opted for cremation. She couldn't afford to bury him and didn't want anyone else to pay for it. Little did she know her son's worth could have easily gotten him into any cemetery in Korea. In the front of the room was a framed portrait of Sunguk from when he graduated college. He smiled at the memory. He and JJ Opa had been so proud of their degrees. They both worked so hard for everything they had and everything they wanted to continue. Next to the frame was a table with a box. I could only guess that it contained an urn with his ashes. I looked down at my lap, and a strong hand touched my shoulder. I looked up and saw Daejun watching me. When I nodded to him, he turned his focus to Mrs. Kim. Auntie, is there anything you want me to get you? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. She then turned and looked around the room and towards the hall. Her eyes were full of tears she wouldn't let fall. I just want this to all be a horrible dream. The youngest of the group, Phoenix, sat on her other side and took her free hand. We all do, Auntie. He leaned forward and looked at me. If we could, we would all rewind the clock to better times. I nodded and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Before I could add anything, The funeral director came over to us. He glanced at Phoenix and nearly sneered at me. We're about to get started. Take your seats, please. Mrs. Kim tightened her grip on my hand as she looked at the director. This young woman was going to be my son's wife. She has every right to sit with me. I looked at her with wide eyes and swallowed. That proposal had been made on a night mixed with two hurt people and way too much liquor. I didn't even think Sunguk remembered the silly promise. I touched her hand, hoping she was trying to get her way and didn't really know all the secrets her son kept. I'm not going anywhere, Auntie, I said softly. The director nodded once and turned to Daejun and Minjun. They made their way to the row of seats behind us. I felt the stares on my back as I tried to keep focus on Sunguk's mother. Daejun leaned in close to my ear. We need to talk later. I closed my eyes as everyone settled in for the services to begin. I didn't want to think about what Daejun wanted to say to me. There was way too much history and pain. I looked at Sunguk's portrait again and felt a tear slide down my face. A hand held out a handkerchief that matched Mrs. Kim's. I looked up and saw JJ Opa holding it out to me. I took it and touched his hand. Thank you, I mouthed. My heart broke as I moved around us and bowed to Mrs. Kim. I was sure his mind was cluttered with questions. I think we were still in the shell shock stage of wondering what each of us could have done differently. How could we not have seen how much he was hurting behind his laughter and smiles? How did Sunguk fall from such a high pedestal? He had been the eldest member of South Korea's most popular boy group, a singer-songwriter that was in high demand. Millions of fans around the world. His songs constantly won awards and accolades. People called him a musical genius. His personality and fashion kept him on covers, and agencies tried to pull him towards modeling or acting. Kim Sung-guk had the world in the palm of his hands and still couldn't beat the demons that haunted him. I sat nearly in a daze as the funeral progressed. Industry heads, the people that worked for Song Opa, all spoke highly of him. No one mentioned what happened to him. Everyone shared happy memories of the man we all loved. When JJ Opa stood at the podium and cleared his throat, I wiped my eyes and gave him a slight nod. He held his head high and glanced at everyone in the room. I was nervous for him. He was a performer at heart, but at this moment, I knew even if no one else did, his heart was broken. Song Hyung and I met when we were 13. Both of us started training at the same time. Everyone knows that back then, I always got into trouble. It seemed like I was forever fighting with someone. One night, Sung Hyung realized I was fighting because someone said something about my sister. I lowered my head, remembering those fights. One night, I was told that I would be out if I didn't get my act together. After that, every time I went to look for Sanna, Sung Hyung was around her. If someone tried to get in her face, he would be there. When I asked him about it, he said that he always wanted a little sister. So he would take mine, since I didn't have my head on straight. Opa grinned at the memory. I was ready to start a fight with him over that too. Then he told me to think about it. Alone, there were only so many fights I could endure, but with help, I could get a lot more accomplished. He looked at the portrait and wiped his eyes. He and I have been through everything together. When I got his final text, all I could remember was that little boy ready to fight the world. And now, I don't think I can accurately describe how I feel. Lost, angry. I feel like the rug has been ripped from under my feet. Everyone thinks that Sung Hyung was a free spirit of the group, like he was the troublemaker. In a way, he was. But he was also the one that kept me grounded. I think right now I'm just sorry. Auntie, I am sorry. I was supposed to be the leader of our group, and I couldn't save him from himself. I wasn't going to sit there while my brother broke down for everyone to see. I moved to stand up when Mrs. Kim stood. She didn't say anything as she wrapped her arms around his shoulders and hugged him. I joined them. She gestured for me to help him to his seat as she moved to the podium. When we reached his seat, I wiped his face with a handkerchief. There's nothing you have to be sorry for, Opa, I whispered to him. He held my hand as Daejun quietly moved me so I could sit in his seat. When I looked at him, the other members of Tempo moved around to make room for me. I nodded my thanks to him, and he nodded once. I didn't know if I would speak here, Mrs. Kim said quietly. I know a lot of people cared about my son. I want to thank you for all of your thoughts and prayers, and for your kind words. Sunghook wanted to make music, and with you all, he achieved his dream. Now he is off to his next adventure. We will miss him, and he will forever live in our hearts. Thank you all for coming here. She bowed once and left the podium. End of chapter. That was chapter 1 of Promised Eternity by Dawn Ibanez, available on Amazon. I hope you enjoy it. And like I said, this is my very first video, and hopefully you will get to see more in the future. Thanks, and enjoy. And as always, stay focused and rise and slay.